Go on and see if you can find any clues to my dad's whereabouts. I'll stay here and try to find something in the ship's computer that can help us.
Hi guys, and welcome back to another AMINO-SHIFT update. It has been a long time since I've put my voice in one of these episodes. I have been working on so many different things. I fixed a bunch of bugs, I've added some new enemies, new environments, and new puzzle mechanics. So, needless to say, the game is not done yet, but I'm really happy with how things have been going. I've added a couple of things. If you're really familiar with some of the early dev tests, you will see that there's some extra stuff in here that wasn't here before. I've added health stations and power stations, as well as shielding for the ship, or at least the windows. Now, another thing I've been looking into developing for a very long time was a holographic system and database that housed all of the different information for different enemies. Now, it's a bit of a prototype right now, but I can show you the basic concept at least. So immediately when you press the button, it does work better if you turn the cabin light off, by the way. So it'll show a hologram of the enemy that you've encountered. I've also made this one interactive. It'll give you a little bit of splurge of information, mantis, small, a little bit of details and lore, but there's multiple slots. So if you look here, every time you press the button, it cycles to a new enemy. Now this actually does tie in with the inventory system for all the DNA slots that you have, which is human, mantis, black widow, dragonfly, stink bug, and roly-poly shield, which I gotta say, I really like the look of this one. I haven't shown this one off too much because I'm still bug testing. I have to redo a little bit of how the mantis melee works, or at least how it is absorbed by the damage health system. But it does block the bullets of the mantoid hunters, so that mechanic at least is working. Now, I don't want to show off too much of what I've been working on. I guess I can show that one off. So this guy is one of the first rigged tri-hybrid mantoids. So if you don't know about AMINO-SHIFT, the tri-hybrids are hybrid locked, meaning they have human, mantis, and another insect species that is mixed together in their DNA, making a very specialized monster, or a boss monster. And this is one of my earliest attempts at a fully rigged, complicated monster. The Bombardier Mantoid is something I've wanted to do for a long time. I've really come to love the Bombardier beetle in real life. For those of you who don't know, Bombardier beetles are these freaks of nature that can combine two different chemicals in their abdomen and make an explosion. So I took the basic concept of that and weaponized it in a mantoid form, giving it kind of a gorilla-like gait. You can see some of the prototypes in just a second. So this is entity testing. Now, if you're following any of the posts I've made online, you'll see this is where I do most of my testing when I'm experimenting with different monsters and different bosses, and a lot of different combat experiences. It allows you to spawn in these pockets of different testing assets. For example, I can shoot this one, and it will load all of the concept art and the testing monster pieces I've been working on. Now, he's not done yet, but the main work of him has been done with the modeling, animation, rigging, texturing, and all that kind of stuff. I would say I'm pretty proud of how this one has turned out. I also have a trigger that you can shoot that activates the boss sliding, which won't be the same across all of the bosses, but for the most part, this is pretty consistent. Now, one comment I've gotten from quite a few people at this point is that a lot of my monsters just have way too much green. And if you've, again, seen my concept art online, you definitely know that's 100% true. I love green monsters. So, in taking that, I've done a completely different take on the mantoid that has orange, red, black, and white transparent bits. So you can see that his gait is a lot more like a gorilla than a human, but since human and ape are kind of a primate, I tried to stretch the anatomy of the human DNA just a little bit more than I would usually be comfortable with, just to give it a really interesting look. Also, following the rules I've been setting for myself with different locomotion for every creature, this totally fits. I'm also happy to see that the helmet piece, the different chitin shields that come up, protecting him from the blasts. Now, there are some concept animations I've put online. I'm still working on the sound design for this guy and a lot of the programming, but this is a really good start for prototyping. You can see an IK prototype here, where he just kind of moves his footsteps around. Now, I've recently been working on this new one. This is a Black Widow mantoid. I did design this one back in 2022, I believe, and it was a pretty good shot in the dark. I mean, I was mixing 3 different creatures that anatomically really don't go together. But given how the Black Widow has been incorporated, I think it's a pretty nice balance. Now, I have actually grayscaled the human part of the skin, just because I wanted to give a little bit more of contrast with some of the more green monsters. I think that the mantis mouth and the eyes is kind of a good indicator that there's some mantis in there. Here you can see some of the early attempts at animating the rig, and honestly I might still tweak how the IK handler works for the Black Widow spinnerets, but for what it's worth, things are going pretty well. Another mantoid that I designed a very long time ago is the Emerald Demon. Now, the Emerald Demon is one of the concepts that evolved from the concept of a creature being able to split in two, and also something I've always wanted to work into a design is having 2 heads that have an actual functionality. This early concept art of the heads did actually carry over into the final model and design. However, I did elongate the horns and got rid of the middle eyes in the forehead. Here you can see some of the prototype animations I was working on where both sections separate. Here you can see a different phase of the creature where the beryllium core has been exposed. Now, this model and animation are pretty old at this point, but I think it still holds up to my style for what I've gone for. The idea of this mantoid is that it can use human-like speech to lure out survivors. This is something that you'll incorporate into your gameplay as you go forward, learning what is human and what isn't. See some concept art here of some of the earlier designs where the brain and vocal cords were shown through a transparent membrane. The glass mantis DNA has been incorporated to give her a giant scythe-like appendage, and I'm pretty happy with the movement and the range of motion. Now, another thing that I wanted to show off is the development of all the different monsters. Now, this has been going on since roughly 2018-ish, when I seriously started getting into digital art, and I designed a ton of different enemies and creatures and all sorts of lore and world building. This isn't exactly the cutting room floor, but it's pretty close to a lot of things that might not make it in this installment. Now, this isn't the only page. There's a bit. There's a bit of things, and this isn't even everything I have to put into this testing area. Now, a lot of these enemies actually do have a lot of carryover into enemies that are in the game. For example, the assassin's head that I was modeling, the art style was changing a bit, but I actually stole the head from the partial model while working on it and added it to the Juggernaut. And it's just kind of stuck, and I never got around to developing the mantoid assassin because the Juggernaut honestly just seemed like a better concept to be developing at the time, especially with my limited toolset as a programmer. Now, one of the few enemies that didn't make it into the game, but is something that I've always wanted to do from the very beginning, was some kind of infiltration monster. As you can see, I put the Infilipede and the Mantoid Infiltrator next to each other. And that's for a reason. These two kind of evolved from the same concept of something that can completely fool a human and maybe get into a survivor camp or into a group of survivors that have escaped the Mantis Queen. Now, there are obviously very different takes on the same concept, so I'll just kind of run through them. This one was more of a parasite than an actually designed or engineered species. This one was more of an engineered, high-tech infiltration unit. And honestly, I might actually model some bits and pieces of him to have in a assembly chamber at some time in the future. Put a lot of thought into designing this guy and actually went through quite a few iterations until I got the exact look I was going for. One of the biggest cut sections from AMINO-SHIFT was the water section, where there'd be a flooded laboratory with a bunch of these engineered water beetles that were meant to reconstruct coral habitats. Now, just because they didn't make it into the game doesn't mean they're not canon, and something I would love to put in the future. One of my favorite concepts for an appendage was actually the water beetle appendage, which would act as a permanent water-breathing appendage and a melee attack. A lot of people have actually commented that they liked this one across different platforms, and I can't remember which thing it was exactly, but people really like the idea of the mother water bug. So maybe I'll bring that back in some future installment. Now, the Gravity Mantoid, in a way, was just a concept exploration of what a gravity-centered monster could even do or look like, and definitely was more pushing from cyborg to like android robot just because of the balance of mechanical implants. But I really did like the concept of the mechanic, and I actually found a way to reverse engineer this into the Super Mantoid, which we'll talk about later. Speaking of the Super Mantoid, there's also another exploration of the concept, the Mantoid Nephilim, which was a stand-in for the Super Mantoid in the earlier design phase. Now, definitely one of those creatures that spawns from just drawing the head. I had actually done a giant page where I designed a bunch of different heads and just tried to push the concept as for what a mantoid was. And this is kind of one of the more extreme ironclad versions that I came out with. It definitely was different than anything else I had made. I just kind of like the really menacing triangular look of the head. So I tried to just design a head based off of it, and I just cobbled together some pieces from the one of the Juggernaut variants, and just the Juggernaut torsos were used to kind of cobble a shape. Now, I've also loved the idea of Morningstar weapons on a Juggernaut creature, or a Juggernaut-like mantoid, so implementing that into the design was actually a lot of fun. The Incubator Mantis is one of those designs that I just threw together in like a day and a half, and I don't seriously consider this one as a finalized concept. It was more of just like a concept exploration, just to see what I could throw together to make a more interesting retaliation for a player just shooting too much. Just kind of balance the mechanic and make the player feel like they can't just be shooting crazy all the time. And one of the ideas I had is a mantis that can convert the energy from a radon energy pellet into time dilation energy, and can speed up the acceleration of one of the eggs cultivating, and it just pops out a full grown little green mantis. So this is a design I'm still working on, but I have the rough concept down for what I want it to look like, and I have two different color schemes for it here. The idea is this is actually another exception to one of my rules, where it's not just human, mantis, and a different insect or arachnid species. It's actually a complete exception to an animal or anthropod species, where mantis, human, and plant DNA have been fused together to make this super versatile hunter, which also goes into the lore of Ana Lo, one of the work in progress characters that you might have seen in the earlier clips. This page is kind of, I think, like a week worth of me just pushing different shapes into different kind of design motifs, I guess is the best way I could describe that, where I wanted to see what was a mantoid and see what I could do with different shape language to infer a function. And some of the monsters you might actually recognize here. The electric mantoid just started out as a head, and then the Nephilim mantoid, you can see the basic shape of it starting to come together there. Now there are a lot more shapes here that I do want to explore. I was definitely going towards more acid science or electric based mantoids, but I think I'll continue to use some of these shapes in future monsters. Now the red mantis actually goes back to the early alpha of AMINO-SHIFT, because I really wanted there to be this appendage that you would have that would make red pheromones come out, and that would let you convert any mantis you found into an ally, and you would in a sense become the Red Queen. Now, obviously, I don't think I could really incorporate this because you would have to change the saving system considerably for what I'm working on, but it's definitely something I would consider for a future installment. So another one of the early Super Mantoid explorations, the Gilted Mantoid. Now, I really liked the idea of a wasp-based mantoid, but every design that I kept coming up with just really wasn't feeling like a mantoid. The wasp is such a specific body type, I thought I would try to go a different route with it. So looking at some of the earlier concept sketches for the Super Mantoid, I tried to make another iteration off of the Mantoid Berserker. And this is kind of the amalgamation I made of it, and he's a very fancy mantoid. He has the same ability as Rachel, but he's got two integrated codon bracelets, and all of the appendages are fused with a gold alloy, giving them a shiny golden look. Obviously the head's a very unique aspect of this one, as the top of his head is actually an eye with a bunch of compound eyes adorning the crown. He also has the early Juggernaut head in the middle which is another carryover from when I was trying to design a two-headed creature that actually had a function. This would be a way for the mantoid to see in the dark and have an echolocation ability, so even if the mantoid technically couldn't see you, it could sense you with echolocation. So these are two mantoids that are pretty rough, but it was me trying to explore the idea of a synthetic creature, which is completely surgically assembled in a laboratory and out of spare parts that the Mantis Queen kind of gets a hold of. Now, I was actually stuck at my job, one of my previous jobs, during a blizzard when I came up with these guys, so I was imagining them kind of functioning in a very cold Arctic environment. A little something that I've never written down, but is definitely something that directed the functionality and design of them. As you can see, they have like vents on the smaller one, and then there's a heating compartment with a nuclear core on the chest of the larger sniper mantoid design. Obviously, I didn't explain this very well, but they had to have heating coils that would keep them from freezing to death, and are definitely based off of military technology that has been stolen. Now, this design is actually meant to be a reconstructed soldier that uses compacted debris that it sucks up through its feet and makes these compressed little gravel bullets. But its gun fires at them at such high speed, it would actually act as a real metal bullet projectile. Now, this mantoid I actually designed on paper. I was in the middle of helping out someone, just taking them through errands, and while I was sitting in the car, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go grab a notebook and I'm gonna doodle. So this is kind of a hybrid of two different art techniques where I designed it on paper, brought it over into my Procreate on my iPad, and then I completely polished the design. So it went from sketch to like polished concept art. And the idea of this one is he's another unique locomotion because he's not a centaur of in the traditional sense where you have a creature, the lower half of a creature, and then the upper torso of a human. You actually have the front of a scorpion, and the tail is actually where the torso of the creature is. So he can lean backwards and the lower body can charge at you, and you can't quite shoot at the controlling torso of the body. It's a different take because I see a lot of centaurism, I suppose you would call it, where they just slap the top half of a human onto another creature. I wanted to kind of shake up that design in a unique locomotion with an actual purpose. Now, this design was actually very synonymous with the Pharaoh-mantoid. And the reason that is because I was trying to make a more unique kind of silhouette that could be recognized even if there was no other details visible, just the silhouette. Which is something I've read online is actually a really good thing to implement in your designs, is something that is recognizable from a distance just by its body shape and its shape language. Now, this actually has some interesting implants where it can fire electricity and have slight magnetic projection abilities. Obviously, this monster hasn't made it into AMINO-SHIFT yet, but I think it is something I definitely want to explore in the future as a type of boss or mini-boss, or maybe even a closer mantoid unit to the Mantis Queen. Now, this one was made very, very, very early on. I think it was actually like 2016, 2017, when I was playing a very popular underwater sci-fi game. You might be able to guess what it is just by that definition. But after looking at how they developed their creatures, I thought I'd take a stab at an underwater mantis, because they actually never made one. So this is my take on an underwater mantis variant. And it could kind of create its own little environment by moving rocks around, and it could be sticking on the ceiling, and then it could swim after you. So it'd be a very versatile unit. And one of the things I wanted to do with this design is actually have it restore the oxygen before you got the cut water beetle appendage, the Rachel clone. So, just a disclaimer, I still want to make this character super badly. I've actually talked to several concept artists and some really good friends of mine about designing this character, and she's going to be kind of the antithesis of Rachel and humanity in a really twisted sense. Now, her design isn't final, but I just wanted to show off some of the concept art that I was doing for her. And some of this is actually a hybrid of my art and a few other artists that I've kind of kit bashed together. Namely, these ones, this one, and a little bit of the face there is not mine. But I've designed the body and some of the other concepts that are going along with it. Now, the idea for her DNA collection, she would actually absorb creatures through a kind of osmosis, where the creature is like horribly just torn apart and dissolved inside, like this screeching, horrible nightmare version of where Rachel can just kind of do a passive DNA scan. Now, one of the concepts I definitely want to do for this character is she has this really cool chitinous helmet on half of her face. So even though she's definitely similar to Rachel, she actually has very prominent mantis-like features and a very like burning, creepy green eye. Also, the extra appendages and 2 codon bracelets that make her even more deadly. I even explored a different type of style where she would have green show through, but her actual chitin would show up as black. Another early concept was her just having this tube in her chest, and every time that she wanted to switch to a different DNA sample, she would have to remove the tube and put in a different creature inside of her chest. Now, an environment I really wanted to add to the endgame was the amniotic pools. Now, these would have been more of a segue biome between the mantoid assembly line and the end battle, where you would have to hide in the slots where a mantoid torso or body would be hanging while it was being constructed. And these really weird nurse, almost like Reaper like mantoids would just be kind of swimming around. And they don't have the best of eyesight, so as long as you're not moving and you're just kind of where they expect a mantoid body to be, they won't attack you at all. This is my kind of just rough art where I threw some torsos of mantoids that I just decided not to go in that direction, but I thought it'd be a kind of cool way to sneak them into the concept art. You can see some of them in the background there. Now, the lightning strike gun is actually something I really, really, really wanted to be as an end game weapon, but I just couldn't make environment big enough for the battle I had in mind with the creature that you would have to use this on. And actually, you could see it in that description there of a glass mantoid would be vulnerable to this thing. And it's definitely one of the explorations of weapons where you can't directly hit an enemy with it, but it helps you kind of draw a lightning strike to the point that you're pointing at. So in certain situations, it would be completely useless as a weapon. In other ones, it would be the absolute orbital strike for any boss level monsters. Now, one upgrade I was really considering for AMINO-SHIFT was an appendage fusion upgrade. Now, I did have this design way back in like I want to say 2017, 2018. And I quickly dismissed it because I didn't really think that I would be able to program just the basic appendages at that point, and it's a little too far in development now for me to put in. That being said, I really do like the idea that every hybrid appendage would have like this cool new use that might not be completely unique, but was such a cool design and maybe even more powerful than some of the basic weapons. Here you can see this example of a Black Widow spinneret and a Wasp stinger appendage being fused together through the DNA assembler, and you get this new crossbow appendage where you regenerate stingers and fire them like a crossbow with the thread that would be produced by the Black Widow component. Another early concept that I was considering was mech suits. I actually do have some footage, if you go way back in my channel, of me doing an underwater mech. Now, I quickly cut that because of the underwater section being cut entirely, but the idea of Rachel having some kind of specialized mech that Gwen had kind of cobbled some advanced codon bracelet amplifier to, where she could just generate a giant limb and that would replace the missing arm that this suit also had. Kind of a mirror of how Rachel has lost her arm. This would kind of act as her Aegis, her giant suit and amplifier. Now the Hollow Mantoid is actually something that would be pretty easily put together, but I do like the premise of its mechanic, where it can distract the more friendly characters from attacking other mantises and mantoids. And actually, the emulator mantoid is a design that actually kind of evolved into the Rachel clone. The idea was this one was actually, and this is actually lore that carries over into the Rachel clone, where Rachel's disembodied arm is actually regenerated into the evil Rachel clone. Now, because of her special abilities, this mantoid would actually get more advanced as you fought it. So you would actually defeat this mantoid multiple times, and each time that you beat it, it would get new abilities because its database would be entangled with yours. So every time you got a new appendage, it also would gain that same appendage slot. So its AI would get more advanced, it would get more powerful, and it would get smarter the more times you killed it or defeated it, depending on the version that we ended up going with. So this mantoid was actually designed as a supplement to a problem, as I couldn't figure out where to put the radiation shield module, or what the origin of it would be. So to design around that, I actually designed a creature that uses this as its main functioning centerpiece, where it lives in radioactive filled waste dumps, and it's like salvaging different components like computer chips and palladium and different rare metals that the Mantis Queen's needing for her brood of mantoids. So by designing that, we would have actually given the player the ability to swim through radioactive pools and stuff at a future date. Now, obviously, there is a ton more that I want to show, but this video is already getting long enough as it is. So just tune in for next time because I have a lot more content coming up soon. I post almost daily on the AMINO-SHIFT pages, and on my YouTube channel I respond to anyone that has any questions on wanting to beta test or any suggestions you have for development. And I'm hoping you guys enjoy what you saw. Thanks for joining me, and have a good one.